Smello fragrance lovers, welcome back to a brand new series of Making Sense Make Sense, the podcast that's all about demystifying the wonderful world of fragrance. Our approach here is simple: have interesting chats about scent with fascinating people. There is no snobbery, gatekeeping or BS here, just passionate people talking about the world of olfaction. I'm Thomas Dunkley and I'm your host. Consider me as your scented front of house. I'm here to show you to your seat, make sure you have a beverage and a snack, and a good overview of the proceedings. Please just don't rustle any wrappers and we should get on absolutely fine. This is the first episode of our third season of Making Sense Make Sense, which I can't believe we're on season 3 already, which makes this episode 22 overall. Now, if you've not listened to the first 21 episodes, then where the hell have you been? You've got some catching up to do, my friend. I kid. You are very welcome here. And anyway, if this is your first episode, hello and welcome firstly. But also, I have a wonderful guest today. So here is a perfectly good place to start. My guest today is Aurelien Guichard, a perfumer who has created fragrances for many brands such as Bond No. 9, Robert Piguet, Narciso Rodriguez, Burberry, Dolce & Gabbana, Jean Paul Gaultier, Kenzo, Zadig & Voltaire. I could go on, but I'm running out of breath. It's pretty much guaranteed you will likely own at least one of his fragrances. He's also the man behind Matiere, a beautiful niche brand that has a unique proposition. The whole concept is about centering the raw material, with each perfume being an exploration of the material in question. Now, to support this, Aurélien also owns fields in Grasse that grow roses, tuberoses and lavender. So those materials are actually used in some of the fragrances, most notably in Radical Rose and French Flower, which gives this really unique story, which is some of the fragrances are materials that he's grown and then used in his fragrances. So it's gone from the ground into the bottle, which is really cool if you ask me. It's a very beautiful brand, but it also has a playful nature, especially within their extrait collection, where the eau de parfums are transformed by a guest ingredient. It's a really exceptional brand. I love it. Thinking back, my first exposure to Aurélien was via a really beautiful fragrance he created for Narciso Rodriguez in 2014, simply called Narciso. Discontinued now, sadly, but it is one of my favorite fragrances. And Narciso was Aurélien's exploration of a gardenia flower seen through Narciso Rodriguez's signature lens of musk. And to me, it smelled like an expansive white gallery space with a giant glowing holographic gardenia in the middle. It was milky, it was soft, and just so utterly beautiful you felt you could have just sat with it for hours. So when Matiere Premier launched, I was really keen to get to grips with the brand's offerings. You know, I loved Aurélien's style, I loved his fragrances, so I really wanted to see what he was going to do under his own brand. And I think there's also an interesting thing when perfumers who have been working for big houses and have been creating to briefs for other brands with evaluators and everyone in between go it solo, not exactly solo, obviously they're working with a team, but go out on their own to create something themselves. It always produces interesting results. And Matiere Premier, I think, is probably my favorite perfumer-led brand in that manner. It has quickly become one of my go-to fragrance houses. I find myself reaching for the Matiere Premier scents quite regularly, and the cult favorite from the brand is Vanilla Powder, which is this most mammoth, unusual vanilla, which is just beastly in its approach, has really become an obsession of mine. I love it. I would coat myself in that for days on end. With all that in mind, I was of course very excited to meet with Aurélien and grill him on all things fragrance, which is exactly what I did. So let's just jump straight into that interview. But before we do, here's a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Making Sense Make Sense is sponsored by Cacharel. Listeners will know that I'm all about making fragrance easy and accessible. Everybody should be able to enjoy it without any unnecessary barriers or complexities. So I'm here for anything that makes the process of exploring fragrances easier. Cacharel are on the same page, which is why I've joined them as brand ambassador. Using a pioneering AI-powered fragrance discovery experience created in Japan in 2019, they offer an entirely new way to explore fragrance intuitively, without the distraction of branding, packaging, or notes. Instead, they translate scent into language. The Scent Sommelier device provides an immersive experience in which the algorithm interprets instinct, information blossoms, and a signature scent is found, harnessing state-of-the-art hardware, software, and AI for a personalized journey. The journey is customer-led. The words you use and your personal associations drive the experience, making it tailor-made to the individual, with Carium's large language model at the heart, driving you to find your next favourite fragrance. Carium the Scent Sommelier can be found in Selfridges on Oxford Street as part of the Thameen counter, and also at the Richmond fragrance boutique Parfum La Danse. So why not pop in and see how Carium's the Scent Sommelier can guide you on your fragrance discovery. Carium will also be at Barnes Fragrance Fair on the 16th of May. Hopefully, we will see you there. Aurélien, thank you so much for joining me on Making Sense Make Sense. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me. Nice to see you, Thomas.
So I've got lots to talk to you about, but I really wanted to kind of start at the beginning, because I know when we talk to perfumers, very often they do have kind of a long history in the perfume industry, but you grew up really in it. You know, you grew up in Grasse to a family that has, you know, a really long history in the perfume industry. Your grandparents were growing jasmine and roses, and your father was, you know, a very famous perfumer. I imagine this meant for you that you were connected to your sense of smell from a really early age. Was smell a huge part of everyday life for you growing up?
Well, actually, it was more, I think, connected to people who were, I think, related to perfume. Sometimes I'm asked about the scent of my childhood, and there are many, but what I remember the most are the people. You know, I grew up with, as you said, with a father who was a perfumer, and when I say perfumer, I mean more of a poet than an industrial perfumer. Grandfather was an expert in Rose Centifolia. He was working for a fragrance company called Robertet. He was looking after, you know, the old rose expertise, both in France and in Turkey. And I grew up also with people who were working in the fields of flowers that they were owning, roses, jasmine. And it was, you know, mainly people from the gypsy community, amazing people, so dedicated to their work with a very, you know, specific and happy way of life. And Italian people also working as pruners on the rose fields. So all this community of people were, to me, what I remember the most from my childhood.
That's really interesting. So it's not actually connected to the smells as much. It's more about the different people that you encounter, the different cultures, the different communities. Would you say that really impacted your approach to perfumery and your approach to the work later in life?
Yeah, well, I think it gave me inspiration of, you know, having something that was part of, some people say an economy, but at least a local know-how. And those different communities were making one community, and which I think is absolutely wonderful. And you know, when you're originally from Grasse, in Grasse we say that everyone is a perfumer, not only the guy who's mixing the scents. You know, everyone who works from the, you know, in the factory as a link to the transformation or the mixing, everyone is a perfumer. And I love this idea of, you know, the contribution of so many people in one thing. And so it was really inspiring. But then, you know, this being said, I have amazing memories of smells. You know, I often, when I'm asked what memories do you have, I often say that I remember the month of May with the pickers, when they have picked up for maybe 5-6 hours of hard work, hand picking every rose centifolia by hand. You end up with like hundreds of kilos of flowers, and you need to drive them up to the factory that is always built near the fields, because the flowers have to be extracted fresh. And I remember going into this Volkswagen Golf that was the car of one of the picker, and it was totally destroyed. There was no passenger seats. The music was loud. We were 4 seated in the back with tons of bags on our knees. The driver was smoking cigarettes. The music was loud. The windows were open, and the smell was incredible. And so the smell is always linked to a very special moment. And this kind of raw beauty of things really had a deep impact on me, because I believe there's something beautiful in this authentic way of living this passion of raw materials and fragrance creation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the rosiest Volkswagen to have ever existed. I'm sure. And I love that, like your quote about everybody is a perfumer. I love that because, you know, fragrance is not just, we think a lot about perfumers, I think, and we do sometimes raise them up on a pedestal because of what they do is so interesting. But you're right in a way that fragrance is really so many people involved in it. It's a global product, and it takes a lot to get a fragrance made. It's not just the perfumer, it's all, you know, everything around it. But, you know, thinking about that, everyone being a perfumer, was being a perfumer the thing that you always wanted to do? Or was it even a question in your mind growing up in that environment? Or how did you make that decision to actually move into perfumery?
Honestly speaking, it has never been really an ambition. You know, I feel a bit spoiled by saying that because I know so many people are dreaming to be perfumers or nose. First, I think anyone can be a nose. It's really a matter of self-expression and meeting the right people and being lucky enough to do things with passion. But what happened to me in my life, I grew up with a father who was a perfumer, a mother, she was a sculptress, and basically at home, you had all kind of artists, and fragrance creation was just one of many arts. And people were talking about that as a way of life, just like some people talk about football in their family. And so when you grow up, you actually spend maybe 18 years in this environment, and then you start to go and do your studies. I remember I went in England doing my studies at university, and I loved the fact that I could get away from France and work with different people from different culture. But I had the feeling that somehow I had to make a decision, and if I wanted or not to keep on living this kind of life of creation. And perfumery was just a tool, really. And my desire was to create things with people from different backgrounds, different origins, different country, not too French in a way. I like this idea of diversity and different cultures. It's really something that I loved. And therefore, that's why I was lucky enough to start to work in the perfume industry, to study perfumery. And this took all over my life as a discipline. But the main thing, I think it's more the luck to work in a creative environment with creative people.
Yeah, see, so it could have been any other creative endeavor. You could have ended up being a sculptor in a way as well. You could have followed that path.
I probably would have been a very bad sculptor.
Well, what you do is sculpting in a way. It's just olfactory sculpting, I guess. Yeah, I suppose it's you wanted a creative endeavor, and perfumery is the medium in which you chose. And you've worked very, you know, commercially for lots of other brands as well as your own brand. So do you feel that working commercially and creating for others really helped you kind of hone what you wanted to do when you set out to create for yourself?
Certainly, but you know, coming back to what you were saying, you know, growing up with a father who was a perfumer, I'm sometimes asked, well, you know, is it an advantage? So for sure, I don't think it makes you a better perfumer, but you know, I think when you start studying perfumery, you think you will like it, but you don't really know if you'll be good at it because you really know nothing. But what the advantage you have, and I had, is that I kind of saw what it took to be a good perfumer, meaning, you know, the investment, the time, the dedication, the happiness that is linked to this work, but also the sadness and the disappointments. And I think it's really helpful in life when you kind of grow up with people who have done it, and you kind of have a feeling of what it's going to be like if you work well. And coming back to your second, to the real question of what you were asking me, you know, again, I think I've been very lucky because early in my career, at the age of 23, when I finished the perfumery school of Givaudan, I met people who basically asked me to create fragrances for them. And they were brands that really I was looking up at, you know, from Guerlain to Nina Ricci, to Gucci, and so my career started really fast, and I don't know if I had the talent for that, but at least I met the people who believed in me, and I was amazed by that, because the creative process is made by the perfumer, but also the person that he develops the fragrance with. And to take a decision to work with young perfumers it really takes courage, and so I never forget that, you know, when you're an early age and you've done nothing, and you have people who sees in you a potential. And I think it's really the future of our field is to have people like that who will keep on trusting young perfumers and who will be able to make some young guys shine, because quite often you say that you're quite creative when you start, and if you're and I think there's a lot of talents out there. And then for many years I worked with different designers for a long period of time. Usually I worked for many years with Issey Miyake. I worked for many years with Narciso Rodriguez, Diane von Furstenberg, then certain brands on a consistent matter with marketing teams from Gucci to Dolce Gabbana. But what I love the most and what I remember is when you work with a fashion designer or even a filmmaker. I worked with David Lynch. You work with people who are so good at what they do in their own fields, but on top of that, there are business people who build their own fashion house or label. And so the creative process is on their field, but it's also as entrepreneurial people that they have made something of their own. And when you work with such people that you admire, I think it gives you ideas because you're inspired by them. And so this collective idea of creating together, working with people who are inspiring, is to me what gave me the courage probably, and also the will to create Matiere Première, because I've never really wanted to create my own company. But it's just by being next to those people that I felt, okay, maybe one day.
Yeah, absolutely. You caught the entrepreneurial spirit from that and learned, and it gave you the confidence in a way to say that actually you could go out and do it for yourself. And I think your mission behind that brand is really, really interesting, because I read that with Matiere Première, you didn't set out to really create a brand. You wanted to create a house led by a perfumer whose mission it was to push the boundaries in terms of quality and know-how. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I'll say it, but I hope it doesn't sound too pretentious. But yes, I mean, when I've worked in 2015. I decided to plant about 10,000 rose bushes. At the time, I had no ambition to create Matiere Première. It was just the fact that my grandparents were getting older, and all those people that I told you about before that I grew up with, I was going to lose contact with them. And I thought, okay, maybe it's the right time to do my own farm in Grasse, certified by Les Fleurs d'Exception de Grasse, to do it organically because there's a sense of modernity and it made sense for me, and to plant 10,000 rose centifolia. At the time I sold my apartment, I planted all those, and my father was getting retirement, and I was like working in Paris and spending maybe half of my time in the south of France. So it was more of a family-driven desire to connect with where I'm from and to work with people that I loved. And as I was it took me 2 years to be an official farmer on top of being a perfumer. And then I had access to those people, the pruners, the pickers, and I planted the rose bushes in 2017. Two of my ex-clients that became friends, Caius Vantnering and Cédric Meffray, we were spending a lot of time in the south of France. And as we were looking at those rose bushes growing, we said, why don't we create a brand that's from the field to the bottle? And that's how Matiere Première was born in 2019, but it was just a consequence of that. And I think the comeback of this kind of idea of quality was the fact that for many years I worked in fragrance companies, and most of perfumers were complaining like me that there was not enough quality, that we need to do more. And to me it happened this way. I was like, okay, how can I create a fragrance brand where quality is unparalleled? And so by producing is one thing, by having a special deal with Takasago was another one, to have like special price of oil, and also to change the structure of a product. Meaning when you look at a fragrance in the market, usually the price of the oil in the bottle is 10, 15, maximum 20% of the cost of the product. We thought, what happens if we try to put 70%? We'll produce a bottle that's not too expensive, that looks good, but not too expensive. We won't put magnet. We'll make a box that we think is okay, but we won't put much money on the box. We'll do everything on the oil. And that was a philosophy. Is we thought, let's do that. And on top of that, let's try to put as much absolute of one ingredient so that someone can feel the quality of an ingredient in a bottle. And that was how Matiere Première started.
And I love that because it's just so organic in a way. It's almost like you're not sitting here going, okay, right, I want to launch a brand. What's my brand idea? What's my brand concept? It's you wanted to, kind of ensure the continuity of the farming, that you grew up with. And then the brand came out from that. So you're really putting the materials at the center of the fragrances. And do you think that's something that just kind of really stands out in the industry, actually saying, look, we are doing something really unique here?
Does it stand out? I think it's not my role to say. But the philosophy, we want to be true to what we say and authentic. Everything we produce, all the flowers that we produce, the Rose Centifolia for Radical Rose, are only coming from our farm, and we don't buy anything from elsewhere. We produce tuberose the same way, where we produce an absolute and non-fleurage for French flower. And it's really a philosophy that we want our agricultural plan to be in line with our productions of perfumes. So it's really, we're growing. Now we have 25,000 rose bushes and not 10,000 like when we started, 60,000 tuberous bulbs. And it's a real proudness. Of course, we don't produce every ingredient, but just when we do it, and we do it for real, and we try to do it well.
Yeah, and it's kind of unique in that sense, doing that whole kind of from the bulb to the bottle approach. That must be a huge amount of work in terms of the growing, the harvesting, the extracting. Can you talk a little bit about the work that goes into actually turning those roses or the tuberoses, or I think lavender is another thing you also grow. How does that? What's the level of work that goes into actually getting those from the field into the fragrance?
Well, the level of work is a level of expertise, is having the access to people, and thanks God, I do have that. But then it's the size, and as a fragrance, as Matière Première, which means raw material, by the way, as Matière Première is growing, we grow our plantations, and so what it takes, well, for the rose, it's about planting. Usually, you plant the roses in February. They will start to make flowers a year and a half before, or 2 years later. Only then you can start to harvest. The harvest takes place in May. Every day we have maybe between 10 and maybe this year will be 15 people hand picking the flowers. They arrive in the morning at 8. They hand pick all day long during 30 days from May 5th to June 5th, basically. And every maybe 3 hours we drive the flowers to the factory where it gets transformed into concrete. Every day they put the concrete of the day on top of the concrete of the days before, and by the end of May, early June, you get your entire production of concrete. The concrete is then transformed into absolute. I get the absolute, and I use it in my formulation. So
it just gives a real special level of depth, I think, to the fragrances. And I suppose you have your Radical Rose fragrance, which is a really, really beautiful rose. And what's radical about it is that's all of that work that's coming directly from you and your farms into the bottle. And I think it just is such a unique story.
Yes, correct, Thomas. And really, we want to make it shine. And coming back to what we were saying, the value that we do is, of course, by having the flowers directly, you can put more of it. And my challenge when I create a perfume is to respect the nature of the absolute. And this idea came to me when, before I created Matière Première, I had some friends who were not wearing perfumes. They were saying they all smell the same, they all smell sweet, they all smell fruity. They would come and visit me in the south of France or in Paris in my lab, and we would smell ingredients. And when they would smell ingredients, they would love them. So there was a disconnection between ingredients and finished perfumes, probably because they were overly mixed, too complex. So I thought, what if we come up with an olfactive proposition where you try to maintain and make visible the quality of these absolutes? Because when you dip, for example, a blotter in orange flower absolute from Tunisia, it smells orange flower, but it smells orange flower for days. So if you put 10% of that in a fragrance, like in Neroli Oranger, then you have a fragrance that lasts in a very effortless way because you don't put many ingredients, but that lasts forever due to the quality of that. And Radical Rose is the same thing, is how can you put a very large amount of Rose Centifolia Absolute in a bottle, deal with the nice side of the Rose Centifolia, which is colorful petally, but also deal with the downside, which is waxy. Yeah. And my goal will be to use certain ingredients to hide this kind of waxiness by using, for example, patchouli and cistus that smells like the sap of the rose when you do the harvest. There's a sap that you have on your hand after maybe an hour of picking up roses, and that will darken in the composition the rose to make it a bit more masculine and a bit more edgy.
So it's respecting the material by trying to showcase it in the most beautiful way possible to kind of give it all the beauty that it's got hidden within it and kind of take all that. Because we know, I find this interesting. I talk about tuberose, right? So when I smell like tuberose Absolute, I always think, who on earth smelled that and thought that could be a nice perfume? Because it's raw, it's fleshy, it's meaty, but you know, that's what the perfumer does, is you take out the beauty, don't you? You know that it's in there, you pair it with things that, you know, highlight certain facets. And I think what I really like about your brand is you don't have complex storytelling, and that's not a criticism. I think it's a compliment, because the story is the material. So you're not saying, you know, here's a fragrance inspired by, you know, an 18th century poet or something. It's just saying this is a rose, you know, an essay in Rose Centifolia or an essay in tuberose. And I think that's really, really beautiful in a way, because you're just focusing on the material. How do you decide which material you want to showcase next for your next perfume whenever you're creating one?
Well, what I usually do is either it's an ingredient that I planted, so then I have no choice.
Yeah, we've got loads of it. We need to use it up somehow, right?
Or in other cases, there are ingredients that I will select for their olfactive qualities, but also for the people who look after them. And I say that because the quality of a raw material depends on three factors: the people who grow it, the environment where it grows, the soil, the climate, and the people who make the extraction. And the goal is to find an ingredient that olfactively in its profile will be unique, respecting the terroir. And people don't necessarily know that, but for example, a rose that will grow in Grasse or the same rose that grows in Turkey won't smell the same. It doesn't mean it smells better somewhere, but it smells different. It's a bit like grapes, really. And then I will look for producers who have a certain ethic. Either they produce in an organic way their ingredients, or they have a social responsibility where they are. So I try to find programs like that. So Vanilla Powder, as an example, was a fragrance created with the vanilla from Madagascar, in the northeast of Madagascar. It was a Fair for Life program developed by the company Takazako. And the amazing thing is they transform the vanilla locally. So the vanilla beans, after 18 months of growing, so they grow for 9 months in the jungle, then they get dried during 9 months, you know, under the sun and boiled. That's when they get all their scent. They are then transformed in Madagascar. So there was something very strong. And where I think Matiere Première is super strong is also the amount of this absolute that we use in the bottle. Because, you know, when you create a perfume, you can put 0.1% of an ingredient and you can claim the ingredient in the bottle. But when you put 1, 2, 3, 4%, you get 40 times more than the 0.1%. So, you know, so for the producer, it makes a difference. And especially when you know that his price will be the same year after year, consistent, and he knows he will have orders. Firm orders. So it's really something that we believe is cool. So the selection of the ingredients is very important, mainly of the main one.
Okay, so it's about finding a unique ingredient or one that's created in a unique way. And I think you mentioned vanilla powder. I have to talk to you about vanilla powder. I've got a bottle here, which I don't quite know how, because I wear this all the time, but it looks like I haven't used any of it. I think because it's quite the powerhouse. This is such a cult fragrance, and I have a little bit of a story around this, which I hope you'll indulge me in for just a second. I heard about this fragrance for quite a long time, and I went, right, I'm going to try it. I need to try it. It's on my list of things to try. I picked it up and I tried it, and I was like, nope, don't like it, not at all, not a fan of that. There's something strange in there. But I find sometimes this happens with fragrances that I know I'm just going to fall in love with, that they just kind of get under your skin a little bit. And then for weeks afterwards, I kept coming back to vanilla powder and thinking, do you know what? This is really, really, really good. And it's such a unique vanilla. It's so dry. It's so diffusive. It's so airy. It's a little bit marine. It's a little bit coconutty. And it's got a real cult following because I think it's so unusual and it has really diverse reactions. Whenever I show someone vanilla powder, they either love it or hate it. Were you kind of surprised by how that fragrance has been received?
Well, to be honest with you, when I was wearing it, and we got so many comments on people, and I love that. You know, it's fine if people don't like it because at the end you can't please everyone. But what really matters to me is when you wear a perfume, that people comment on you. They say, okay, what are you wearing? What is it? And vanilla powder is unique because I had in mind the idea of, you know, dipping a vanilla in an overdose of powders. And there are some amazing vanilla existing on the market, usually worked in a very dark, sensual way, leathery, ambery impression. I wanted to go to the opposite of that, and therefore white. And you know, perfumers use liquid ingredients, but also solid ones. And among those solid ingredients, you have incense, for example, all the resins, but you have powders. And the powders are the note that you mentioned earlier on. Saltiness because of cologne, minerality because of oak moss. Vanillin and ethyl vanillin are powders. Ambrosenide is a powder. Coconut smells like a powder. So I've tried to use an overdose of those powders. There's almost 45% of powder in this bottle, which is I would say a real challenge to make it liquid. And when you wear it, that's why it smells different, because it's like wearing a cloud of white powders around you. And it stays on your coat because it's all those little crystals stays on you. And that's the cool thing. It's very physical as a perfume. It doesn't smell liquid. It smells powders. And I love the idea of smelling like what it says. You know, at Matiere Première, when as I am the nose, but also the creative director, everything starts with the olfactive. I select an ingredient. I create a formula. Usually it takes me about a year to do it. 1,000 tries, 2,000 tries. When it's finished, the name reflects the formula. And only we start the shooting. And so it's very different from a fragrance house where you would have a brief, a name, and then the formula comes. You know, it's at the center, and that's what I think creates this kind of unity between the name and the smell.
Because you're not trying to create a perfume to a particular idea or concept. You're just trying to find the perfect name once you've created it. And I think we have a little saying, which is it does what it says on the tin. And I think that's the thing with vanilla powder, is it is vanilla powder. I do have a very specific vanilla powder coat that is my vanilla powder coat, because I don't think any other fragrance can even get a look in on that. It's vanilla powder forever. Are there any materials that you really want to showcase but you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet? Is there do you have a list of things that are on your mind?
Hundreds.
To the ones hundreds, yeah, thousands possibly, I'm sure.
And you know, the funny thing is sometimes I look at ingredients that I've already worked, and I would probably work them differently today. And sometimes when you ask business people if they would do the same thing, if they would have to do it again, they usually say yes. But when you ask creative people, they usually say no. So, you know, even what I've already worked, I would do it differently. But, you know, there's a project that I loved, and we spoke about it earlier on, was the project around, there's two that I'd like to tell you. Crystal Saffron was a fragrance that we launched, I think, 3 years ago. But the wonderful story is usually you're told that a perfumer travels the world to find ingredients for its formula. And this one day I arrived in my office and there was a little bottle of saffron oil from Greece. And I had no clue, and still now, who put it on my desk. I smelled the saffron from Greece. I loved it. All of a sudden, I was like, right away, I knew what I wanted to do with it. I made a few formulas in the afternoon, and the fragrance was finished, which rarely happens like that, you know. And then I looked at what company was producing this saffron. It was Robertet. I called Robertet. I said, where do you get this saffron from? So they explained to me that it was from Greece, in Kozani, by Thessalonique, by the Mount Olympus. And I traveled there, and I saw a region that no one knows. a valley at the feet of the Mount Olympus where you have 900 families growing saffron. And they've been doing that for centuries. And the quality of the work is incredible. And that's gave birth to Crystal Saffron. And the story is wonderful because when you live it in an authentic, real way, you want this to become alive and to do your fragrance. And those people, they handpick the crocus flower in November. They separate, within the crocus flowers, the little stigmats from the red one to the orange one, and from that they make an oil, which smells amazing, not eatable at all, very crisp, very, very qualitative. And that's really what drives my work, is like when you have this kind of adventure, it's incredible.
Yeah, I would think whoever left that on your desk knew exactly what they were doing, I would say. Some very direct sales tactics from Robertet, I would think. So leaving that.
I don't think so, but
we touched on it a little bit earlier, but you have created a huge number of fragrances commercially for big fragrance brands like Jean Paul Gaultier, Comme des Garçons, Bon Number 9, Narciso Rodriguez. I could go on. The list is huge. And obviously you're working to a brief for a client. And I'm curious, your creative process then is obviously very different when you're creating for Matiere Premier versus another brand. I think we've talked about what that process is, but do you enjoy both of those in a way? Do you enjoy the challenge of having to create to a brief and then the freedom of creating in your way?
Yes, I love it. I mean, I even love to work with other people. I love to work, I never work alone, so even at Matiere Première, I have friends who are not perfumers, of course, but I like to have their ideas, their point of views. But when I work for a brand, I work at the service of that brand, meaning that I'll take a total different role where I will listen very much what the brand is about, what the couturier wants. I will go and look at the archives of the brand. I'll go probably to the store to see the people who buy the brand. And then I will start to formulate a story, but the formulation has to be in line with the style of the brand. When I work for Matiere Première, I work at the service of a raw material. And just as you said it earlier, I never take a personal inspiration. So it will never be me walking into a garden and being like, oh, I thought about that and let's do a perfume. It will always be a very factual approach of transforming an ingredient into a perfume. That's it. And then I think the beauty and the magic of a perfume happens in between the scent and the person who wears it. And that's where I have no place. That's when someone who is wearing a perfume and gets stopped in the street, that's when someone needs to wear his perfume to go to work to feel better. That's the magic of perfumes, is when then you meet people, you interact with people thanks to that. And my role in every case, whether it's for Matiere Première or for another brand, is to create fragrances that I hope will make you being stopped in the street, in a club, in a bar, because that's why you buy perfume for.
Absolutely. I can confirm that you have done exactly that. My vanilla powder certainly gets me stopped in the street by people. I think it's really interesting what you say there as well, because almost as a perfumer, you own that creation right up until the point that you bottle it and put it on counter to sell, and then it's no longer yours, right? It becomes almost the property of whoever experiences it, whether they buy it or whether they just try it in store. You kind of lose any sort of say over what it is. It becomes part of that person's life.
Yeah, I mean, all you can do, I think, is to be authentic in your approach, having the strong belief that you create something unique, because I think it's very important to create unique fragrances. And usually what I do is I have maybe 10 people around me who are not fragrance experts. I love not to work with experts because I think it's better, and I usually give them the final modifications when I get maybe 90% of the formula right, and I wait on the moment where they all get stopped in the street by wearing one specific modification, and I'm like, okay, this is the right one. This is what makes people react, because sometimes you create a fragrance and the tiny little details of change make the fragrance diffuses or not. And I'm sure you've noticed that, Thomas, but certain fragrances make people react and some don't. And so to me, it's really a challenge when I create a fragrance to kind of have this kind of promise that people, when they wear it, things will happen.
Absolutely, and I find that's a really interesting approach there, because it's almost that you can be happy with the general spirit of the formula and how it smells, but actually it's how it's performing in the real world is often your indicator of how well it's going to, or well, whether it's complete, I suppose.
Correct.
That's an interesting approach. I've not heard a perfumer talk about it in that way before. We did also talk about this very briefly earlier, but it's something I want to hone in on a little bit more, because I think one of the real strengths of the brand is the visual aesthetic. It's very clean and elegant, and there's a simplicity to it. And the bottles are kind of sort of reminiscent of the bottles perfumers get their materials in, kind of the tiny little sample bottles. And was this I mean, I've got a whole load of them here. They look great next to each other on a shelf, I tell you. But was this a really clear aesthetic for you to begin with, or did it take a really long time to develop to get it the way that you wanted?
I'll tell you the real story. When I started, I really wanted, as a perfumer, to create. If I was going to launch Matiere Première, it had to make sense. And found the name. I had in mind the style, the consistent style that I wanted to give in the brand, the consistent olfactive style, which was very important to me. And then the bottle, I started to see bottle designers, started to draw myself. It was a nightmare. It was horrible, terrible. And I remember on May 14th, 2018, it was 1 year and a half before launching Matière Première, my lab assistant, I asked her to give me a solution of Opoponax at 10%. I wanted to resmell, and the label machine was broken in the lab, and she hand cut a label where basically you could see the color of the oil, where the label was not covering the entire bottle like it usually does in fragrance houses. And I thought, well, she brought it to me, and I was like, wow, that looks just amazing. And I had those bottles for 18 years during my life under my nose or under my eyes. And I said, well, let's make a kind of size-up version of this. And this will make sense also because I'm really influenced by the whole minimalistic and functionalistic approach of design. I worked many years with Issey Miyake, and he was very influenced by Tado Ando, by all the design that makes sense. And I think for a perfumer and for a perfumer house, I wanted this kind of functionality. So that's what inspired the bottle. Then the visuals, I think they need to reflect the olfactive. So we try not to make people dream, because to me it's starting to fake things when you try to make people dream. We just try to show what we think is purely beautiful of a raw material. And often in my life, what I thought was beautiful was a moment in between the ingredients were picked up and the moment they will get transformed. This very moment when you have a bag of roses that you empty and you can smell all those overdose of colors and flowers and smell of roses. Same thing with the tuberose. It's incredible. I mean, the scent of the pure natural ingredients. So I think the brand wanted to be in that kind of contrast between a minimalistic, strict design and overdose of one ingredient.
And it really leaves space for interpretation. I think that's what's so beautiful about it, because you look at the bottle and you're not getting a huge amount of the story of the fragrance. That allows you to kind of smell it and then go take your own interpretation from it. Whereas I think a lot of the time we do have very overindulgent bottles, I think, and packaging design, which kind of almost saying, this is the story, you take this is what's the intention behind it. Whereas this, I think, just leaves a lot of space for everyone to take their own thing from it, which makes it a really unique proposition.
Thank you, Thomas. And I agree with that. When you compose fragrances in a very simple way, each person enters differently. And that's very interesting. It's a bit like when you write a story and you write a simple sentence and there's double meanings. I've noticed that sometimes you need to make things a bit more effortless and to make, and maybe sophistication is linked to that fake simplicity. Whereas when I think of fragrances in the 80s, which were amazing fragrances, the sophistication was linked to complexity. And so there's a sense of modernity in this simplicity that I try to play with Matière Première.
And what makes real sense to me with the bottles is also, you subvert your image when you look at the X03 collection. So the bottle is clothed entirely in black, almost as kind of an inverse of the original bottle. And that's because these fragrances are really kind of a new essay on the same material, but with a olfactory twist in them. So, for vanilla powder, you've added tonka. I think for the rose radical rose, it's immortelle. For Encens Suave, it's amber. So you're kind of giving a bit of a twist to show that there is an olfactory twist in the bottle. Was that kind of the intention behind it? Was actually to show that this is something similar but different when you're going for the X-rays? Because I just sense with the X-ray collection, you're having a little bit of fun. You're saying, okay, you thought I'd explored rose, but here's a new twist on it. I'm not sure what that question was. There's probably about 6 questions in there already, and I apologize.
No, but I agree. You get it. I mean, I think when I created most of those fragrances, I felt I was pushing very much the possible quantities. But then 5 years later, 4 years later, I felt, okay, I can do actually more because people understand it. And in fact, the acceptance is quite high. So let's put more of the main ingredient. But then I thought, okay, is this just enough to put more of the main ingredient and more concentration? I'm not sure. So I wanted people, perfumery, what's beautiful is when people understand, and it's a matter of sharing. So I wanted people to understand the impact of one additional ingredient, a guest ingredient, so that they understand why they would buy vanilla powder extrait, because by adding some tonka bean, for example, it rounds up the fragrance, it hides a little bit the saltiness, and makes the fragrance more smooth and rich. And the idea behind the extrait versions is not to create more powerful versions. It's just to create deeper, richer, smoother versions of the eau de parfum. Because I feel it was something that was bringing something additional to Matiere Première.
Yeah, and I think that's sensible because I think a more powerful vanilla powder might be the thing that ends the world because it is already pretty powerful as it goes. One of the things that I definitely wanted to talk to you about before I let you go is around your new store in London. So by the time this episode is live, you'll have recently opened that store and I'll hopefully have had a chance to visit. And this is obviously a space where in London you can bring Matiere Première alive for consumers. What was the intention behind the space and what can visitors expect?
Well, there was many intentions. First was to be true to the brand and to Matiere Première as a fragrance house. I built Matiere Première with Caius and Cédric, my 2 partners, as a desire to share the beauty of raw materials through the fields. We host a lot of people coming to our fields, mainly distributors, retailers, so that they see that what we do is real. But so within the store, we wanted to have an experience on raw materials so that people could smell pure, the raw materials, the main raw materials that we use in our fragrances. And that was really at the heart of the experience. Because I've always felt that it could be intimidating to walk into a perfumery store and to talk to someone about a perfume, and the person will tell you, how great is this perfume, you should buy it. It's not really what you want to hear. And I thought, when you expose to people raw materials, then it's much less intimidating because no one is wrong. And you can give your point of view. It's interesting. You can be surprised by what it smells. And then you can discover a fragrance by knowing the raw material. So that to me was very important, to create a moment of exchange and that people understand what we do. The second thing is the design. The design was important because I wanted to be close to that functionalism that we spoke about. And I was so admirative of the work of some Swedish designers called the Alrod. They have designed the Axel Arigato stores, Alaya. They make a lot of fashion stores, and they're very famous for their minimalistic approach, and they understood this functionality. And they came to visit me in the farm in the south of France. They were meant to stay in a hotel, but the hotel was closed. They slept on the sofa at our home. They understood what we were doing. We spent a great time, and they accepted to work for us as an independent small brand. It was incredible, like a dream come true, and I love the result of it. And they mixed the functionalism of a lab together with the light and the glass that you find by the glass makers in the perfume industry, and you can see in the store the raw materials. So it's really something that we feel we're fitting with our values. And finally, the locations. I lived in London many years in my life, and I don't know if we're going to open so many stores, but Paris was the second one after S03E01. We opened also in Berlin in Matiere. And London was an important place for me to be in Covent Garden because it's a place dear to my heart. And we were lucky enough to find a great location where I think Matiere Première is different from the rest of the store around. And there's a great population. It's a fantastic country, England, for niche perfumery. I mean, when I talk to my friends who also have fragrance houses, we think, niche perfumery has been put forward very much by London and UK in general. There has been an entire group of people from the fragrance foundations to in England to journalists and people like you who have spoken loud about something that was very minor years ago. And so, yes, we're very proud to be there.
Yeah, it sounds like a really, really important space to visit. I can't wait to go, and to be able to experience those raw materials alongside the fragrances is really exciting. So I look forward to spending a whole day there. You're going to have to kick me out, I'm sure, because I'll be there all day.
Hope so. You're welcome.
Before I let you go, what's next for Matiere Première? What can we look forward to in the future?
So first, as you notice, we don't launch very often new fragrances. I think the last fragrances we launched was vanilla powder extrait de parfum. Now vanilla powder is a key fragrance for Matiere Première. We launched last Christmas a collection of 5 candles. I don't know if you smell them, but they're special because I wanted to underline not the fragrance, the eau de parfum in candles, but just the main ingredients. So each time it's one main ingredient in between the harvest and the extraction, like the rose just before picking it up in the morning, the tuberose at night, where it smells very special, almost sensual in the air, but floral at the same time. The incense in Oman, that the scent is incredible when it's just in the bags made out of fiber and heated by the sun. So it's every time it's the ingredient and the place where it grows. And this collection on candles was launched last Christmas. And we're finishing a new project that I started in 2023 by planting lavender. We spoke about it. In fact, it's not even lavender, it's lavandine. So the next project that I'm working on is a new take on lavender, which is an iconic ingredient in perfumery. And my challenge is to kind of find a new way of creating a lavender in a non-traditional way that we feel is edgy enough for people to think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's got my name all over it. Lavender is one of my favorites. So I love a fougere. I love anything lavender. So I'm really excited to see what. Yeah, I'm excited to see.
What's your favorite ones?
Oh gosh, so my favorite possibly would be discontinued now, but in terms of I'm thinking fougere specifically would be Rive Gauche Pour Homme by Yves Saint Laurent. I think that's one of the most beautiful fragrances. And also another discontinued one, annoyingly, was Anti-Heroes for Etat Libre d'Orange, which was a really beautiful lavender.
Okay, wonderful. In England, you had an amazing lavender also that is a real reference for perfumers, is the lavender by Yardley.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Yardley's lavenders are really, really great.
Incredible. Very, very nice.
Yeah, well, I'm sure yours is going to be equally incredible, but I'm excited to see what kind of twist is on there. So hopefully we'll get to hear more about that soon. But Aurélien, this has been a real pleasure for me. I'm a bit of a fanboy, as you can probably guess. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today and giving me a bit of an insight into your world.
Well, thank you. And for us, and I speak on behalf of Matiere Première, we feel very fortunate to have a community and people like you who speaks about fragrance in general. I think it's a golden time for independent perfumery, also for diversity and for finding a way of having different takes on fragrance creation. So thank you for the moment and for the time you gave me.
What a fascinating and charming man, eh? Since recording, I have actually managed to make my way to Matiere Premier's London boutique, and it's just as beautiful as I expected. The design is very clean and open. It's a bit Scandi, it's a bit industrial, it's very inviting and welcoming without being cluttered. And it allows the fragrances to really take focus. They are center stage in that space. The real treat though is the materials, and you can spend a lot of time smelling many of the materials used within the fragrances, and I find it really fascinating being able to smell them in isolation as well as in the context of the fragrances. It does help you understand and interpret the fragrances in a more rich way. I was particularly blown away by this beautiful coffee absolute that I believe is used in Encens Suave, which I have the extrait of. It's just gorgeous, so velvety and smooth. And I don't drink coffee. I don't really like the taste of coffee, but I love the smell, and that blew my mind. That was beautiful. They really do place the raw material front and center. Now, you can visit the boutique if you want. It's at 31 King Street in Covent Garden. Maybe I'll see you there. I do have a tendency to be hanging around perfume boutiques until the police are called, but that's not for discussion here. You can find out more about Matiere Premier at their website, matiere-premier.com, or via their Instagram at Matiere Premier Parfums. I'll put those in the show notes for you, so it's nice and easy. That's it for this week. I will be back next week with another exciting new episode where we will be exploring the idea of perfume as a protest, so do be sure to tune in for that. A massive thank you to Carium, our sponsor for this episode. I'm all about making fragrance and fragrance discovery more accessible, and Carium's innovative AI solution, the Scent Sommelier, offers an entirely new way to explore fragrance by translating scent into language, and you can find out more at www.carium.com. As usual, I'll hand over to our guest to tell us the fragrance they have an emotional connection with. After all, fragrance is an emotional art form. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can at Making Sense Make Sense. But for now, I will leave Aurélien to have the final words, and I will see you next week.
So a fragrance that I have an emotional connection to would be Loulou. I was the age of maybe 10 when my father created it, Loulou by Cacharel. And still today, when I walk into a perfumery store, I still see bottles of Loulou, and it reminds me of my childhood. Another one that I have a strong connection with is Issey Miyake for women. Probably one of the ever modern fragrance. I still smell it today. It's a masterpiece that was created in the 90s and still smell like if it was made yesterday. And probably the most emotional one that I have is the scent of roses that I have in my field and in the south of France that reminds me of my childhood as well.